Have you ever felt like you just aren't quite good enough? Or maybe, you're somehow lagging behind everyone else? Well, what if I told you that feeling inadequate doesn't actually mean there's something wrong with you? In fact, it means your mind is functioning exactly as it's supposed to. Today, in this explainer, we're going to bust the myth that feeling less than is a bad thing. We'll be doing this by unpacking Alfred Adler's absolutely fascinating psychological framework. And honestly, by the end of this, you might just view your biggest insecurities as your greatest assets. Okay, let's take a quick look at our roadmap for today's explainer. We're covering four main areas. 1. The universal minus position. 2. The engine of compensation. 3. When compensation goes wrong. And finally, 4. Clinical strengths and limitations. Let's dive in. So, starting right off with Section 1, the universal minus position. All right, so Adler posited this really paradigm-shifting concept. He suggested that the human struggle is fundamentally a movement from a perceived minus position to a plus position. Think of your life as this constant upward trajectory. We aren't just sitting around reacting to random events. We're actively, both consciously and subconsciously, trying to climb out of a deficit. It's like a built-in upward drive. And this marks a brilliant shift in psychological thought. You see, unlike Freud, who heavily emphasized primal biological drives just sort of pushing us blindly from behind, Adler gives us this radically empowering alternative. We are purposefully striving upward from a minus to a plus. Honestly, it's an incredibly optimistic way to view human behavior. This brings us to primary inferiority. Adler defines this as a universal human condition arising from our initial state of helplessness as infants. The absolute keyword here is universal. I mean, we all start out literally unable to feed ourselves, walk, or, survive on our own. So it's not a pathology at all. It's simply the shared human catalyst for mastery and learning as we grow up. Moving right along to Section 2, the engine of compensation. Now, this builds into the core engine of our personality, and it happens in 3 distinct steps. First, we perceive a deficit, maybe a physical weakness, a bit of social awkwardness, or some psychological gap. Naturally, that deficit creates a deeply uncomfortable state of tension. But here's the magic. We don't just sit in it. Our psyche instinctively seeks to bridge that gap through something called compensation. So, compensation inherently drives us to improve our circumstances. This means your perceived weaknesses, they are actually dynamic potentials. Take a student who feels they lack athletic prowess, for example. They usually don't just give up. Instead, they might intensely focus on academics to compensate. That perceived physical weakness literally fuels their intellectual achievement. Pretty cool, right? But what happens when this forward momentum gets derailed? That brings us to Section 3, when compensation goes wrong. Because let's be real, things don't always go smoothly. When the human engine of compensation breaks down, we start to see pathological variants of this normally healthy process emerge. The first variant is the dreaded inferiority complex. This occurs when that natural drive for growth gets stymied. Notice the massive distinction we're making here. Normal inferiority is totally healthy and motivating. But an inferiority complex means the tension isn't resolved. Instead, it just builds and builds until it results in deep discouragement and, eventually, a total withdrawal from life's tasks. Conversely, when compensation is vastly exaggerated, it manifests as a superiority complex. This is where an individual masks their deep-seated inadequacy by acting arrogant, domineering, or overly ambitious. Basically, it's a false plus position. They're just hiding the minus instead of actually resolving it. Finally, let's wrap up with Section 4, clinical strengths and limitations. These concepts, they aren't just theoretical musings from a bygone era. They remain incredibly vital today. In fact, they offer a highly practical pathway for modern therapists to reorient discouraged individuals right back toward healthy mastery and social interest. Clinically speaking, we see some amazing therapeutic tools here, like normalizing struggle to reduce shame, providing goal-oriented motivation, and allowing for a holistic assessment of a client's overall style of life. But of course, we absolutely have to balance that against critical limitations. For instance, there's a real risk of cultural bias when applying this to collectivist societies, which prioritize group harmony over individual mastery. Plus, there's always the danger of oversimplification, where very real biological factors or systemic trauma might be mistakenly chalked up to a simple inferiority cycle. Adlerian theory ultimately leaves us with this incredibly powerful paradigm shift.
As the text states, they transform the view of human limitation from a static defect into a dynamic source of potential. It challenges us to fully embrace our limitations as the very engine for our personal growth and ultimately our contribution to society.
Before we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with a bit of a provocative thought regarding your own personal engine. What perceived minus in your life is secretly driving your style of life? Are you running from it, or are you actually using it to strive for your plus? Something to think about. See you next time.